We acknowledge that we are on the lands of Anishinaabe Nation. This spot where we gather is the traditional lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. We also recognize that this land is now home to the Delaware Nation. This land was settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we, as beneficiaries of the treaty, must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water. Mr. Mayor, there is no supplementary agenda this evening, and we have one disclosure of a pecuniary interest, and that is Councillor Story with regards to 11G. I'll hand it over to Planning Services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The process to be followed for each planning application will be as follows. 1, the clerk will announce each individual planning item. 2, the mayor will ask if there is anyone present other than the applicant and or their agent with an interest in the application, and to indicate so by raising their hand. 3, the clerk will advise if anyone is present virtually wishing to speak to the application, or if written or video submissions have been received. 4, if someone other than the applicant or the applicant's agent indicates an interest in an item, there will be a presentation by administration. 5, individuals with an interest in the application other than the applicant will be asked to proceed to the podium, provide their name and address, and address council. 6, the applicant will be asked if they wish to proceed to the podium and address council. 7, administration will be asked if they have any comments based on any of the discussion that may have occurred. And 8, council will be asked what action it wishes to take regarding the item. Notice. If any person or public body that files an appeal of a decision of council in respect of the proposed applications does not make oral or written submissions to the municipal clerk before the proposal is approved, they are not entitled to appeal a decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal, if otherwise eligible, unless in the opinion of the tribunal there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party to the appeal. Information on council's actions tonight will be posted on the municipal website. All persons who have made a request or who have made an oral or written submission regarding a particular planning item will receive a notice of council's decision, including appeal procedures. Any other person who wishes to receive a notice of decision must submit a written request to the municipal clerk. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, before we start, we have an announcement with regards to deputations. We have several deputations this evening, so I'd like to remind all individuals of some guidelines for participation. For those of you joining us in person, please proceed to the podium where you'll be called upon to speak. For those that are joining us electronically, please leave your video or camera turned off and your microphone or audio muted until you are called upon to speak. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your deputation is complete, and you are welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast via live YouTube. We will also have 5 minutes to speak, and there will be a timer on the screen. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting. Interrupting councillors, staff, or other speakers, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, turning your camera on in inappropriate times, and hate speech or defamatory comments. The use of posters, signage, and literature is also prohibited. One last reminder for speakers, please do not take offense if you're following your presentation there are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. With that, we'll start with the first application, 11A, application for zoning bylaw amendment, Justin and Luann DeSaulniers, 25 Louise Street, community of Tilbury, West Kent.
Is there anyone present other than the applicant and or their agent with an interest in the application and to indicate so by raising your hand? Seeing none, Councillor Anderson and Councillor Thompson, can I get you to move this, please?
Happy to move it.
And seconded.
Any questions council has of administration? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0. Moving on to 11B, applications for consent and zoning bylaw amendment. Patricia Powell Serenipkis and John Serenipkis, 15842 McEwen Line, Community of Zone, East Kent.
Is there anyone present other than the applicant and or their agent with an interest in the application and to indicate so by raising your hand? Seeing none, Councillor Pincinel and Councillor Wright, can I get you to move this, please?
Happy to move that, Your Worship.
Happy to second it, thank you.
Any questions from council? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0. 11C, application for consent and removal of the H holding symbol 1451242 Ontario Limited, Riverview Line, Community of Raleigh, South Kent.
Is there anyone present other than the applicant and or their agent with an interest in the application? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none, Councillor Sakachi and Councillor Doyle, can I get you to move this, please?
Happy to move it, Mayor Caniff.
I'll second that.
Any questions from council? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in and motion passes 16-0. Moving on to 11D, application for zoning bylaw amendment 2501211 Ontario Inc., 15895 Longwoods Road, Community of Zone, East Kent. Council, we did receive one email as a deputation that was emailed out to you earlier this evening.
Is there anyone present other than the applicant and or their agent with an interest in the application? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll put it, Councillor Wright and Councillor Pincinel, can you move this, please?
I'll move.
I'll second, but I got some questions, your
Okay,
worship.
Counselor Pinsino?
Thank you. Through you to Ryan. The deputation we received from Greg and Kelly Westman, Ryan, there was a question on there whether a separate laneway could be put in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this property, it is possible to put a separate laneway to Clackin Road. However, the municipality would not be supportive of a second laneway to connect with Longwoods Road at this location.
Okay, so you don't really see a lot of whether that's going to make a big difference or not in traffic?
No, so I've reviewed the letter. I've read the letter from the neighbors, and the main concern was dust generated by the existing location of the driveway. Since the property was developed or redeveloped in 2019, for a couple of years, the driveway was primarily gravel, which did generate some dust. And it's my understanding that even some residents who lived on the property were concerned with the dust. The applicant, who I believe is here tonight, did advise that he laid recycled asphalt, which is a different material that is not as dusty as gravel, which had rectified the situation to satisfy the residents of his property. However, the applicant also did advise us today that he would be more than happy to talk with his neighbor, to be a good neighbor, to see if there's anything further that he might do to mitigate any dust that might be coming through their property in the summer.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Then there was another question regarding the natural heritage and the species at risk.
Yeah, thank you. So in 2018, prior to the redevelopment of this property, and just for council's awareness, over a couple decades ago, there was 7 mobile homes or 7 travel trailers located at this property where people were living. And then that property sort of disbanded. That use no longer existed for a number of years, and the current owner purchased the property to revitalize it and introduce new mobile homes at the property. So prior to doing that, the owner completed what's called an environmental impact statement in 2018. And this was a very detailed assessment of the flora and fauna that exist on the property and the natural functions of the woodlot and wetland that are nearby to this property. The applicant in 2022 also completed an update to that environmental impact statement, which validated the findings from the 2018 study and updated it with new information. So as a result of that environmental impact study, a number of things are required now of the owner. The first is to implement best practice mitigation measures, which are recommended in that environmental study during construction. There is avoidance required of some of the more, avoidance is required of the most significant areas of that woodlot, and that is being done through the zoning bylaw amendment. There's no proposed alteration of the most significant areas of this woodland. And thirdly, the owner is aware of his obligations under the Environmental Protection Act, the Endangered Species Act, with regard to an endangered species being the flowering dogwood tree, which is located on this property. However, all instances of this species are over 45 meters from where development is proposed, which is acceptable under the Endangered Species Act. So this site has been thoroughly studied and documented, and the owner is required to carry out construction in accordance with those findings.
Okay, that's good. All the bases are covered. I've watched this place for a lot of years, and they've really cleaned it up. It was an old gas station restaurant. Then it sat vacant there for several years and was falling down. The new owners have really done a good job of cleaning that up. And I think with the shortage of homes, you look at the ones that he's put in there it's a very nice, it's a clean setup. And I assume he's going to do that with the other 14 that are coming in. And, give credit to the new owners there. They're doing a good job, and I look forward to supporting this. And I like to hear the fact that he wants to work with his neighbor to be a good neighbor. And I think at the end of the day, I think everybody's going to win here. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0. 11E, application for consent and zoning bylaw amendment Joseph and Eva DeRocher and John and Pamela Ruger, 21198 and 208 Erie Street South, Community of Wheatley, West Kent.
Is there anyone present other than the applicant and or the agent with an interest in the application? If so, please raise your hand. Councillor Anderson and Councillor Sakatchi, can I get you to move this, please?
I'm happy to move it, Mayor.
Happy to second it, Mayor Caniff.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in and motion passes 16-0. Moving on to 11F, application for draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment, 1413506 Ontario Limited, Middleton Line, Community of Wheatley, West Kent.
Is there anyone present other than the applicant and or the agent with an interest in the application? If so, please raise your hand.
One over here.
Yes, please come up to the, actually, sorry, we'll do a presentation first and then you can come up. Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The municipality has received applications for zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision for a parcel of property in the community of Wheatley, accessible from Middleton Line. The nature of the application is to support the development of these lands to a new 48-lot residential subdivision. The zoning application proposes to zone the property into a site-specific residential low-density third zone, which would permit the proposed development that is sought by the applicant, including a minimum front yard frontage of 10.33 meters. The screen now is a demonstration of the plan of subdivision which is proposed and before council tonight for consideration. The proposal seeks to develop the portion of the lot that is undeveloped with 3 new streets, 48 new residential lots for single detached or semi-detached homes, as well as 1 block for stormwater management facility and public parkland. This proposal has been reviewed in the context of the provincial policy statement and the Chatham-Kent official plan and would comply with these documents based on the recommendations before council if approved. Therefore, it is recommended that zoning bylaw application D14 WH13230 to rezone the subject lands from deferred development to residential low-density third, exception 1663, and open space be approved and the implementing bylaw be adopted. And 2, that draft plan of subdivision application D12 WH12330 in the community of Wheatley, which proposes 48 vacant residential lots, subject to the draft conditions set out in Appendix D to the report, be approved. Thank you.
Okay, you can now.
As deputations come forward, could you please cite your name and your address before starting?
Sure. My name's Rory Donaldson McCaw, 655 Middleton Line. Hello. So this was I can't really see, but I think this is the last draft that we got. But initially, everybody received from registered mail a draft that was not this one. So there's been some amendments. It sounds great. The other road, Middleton Line, is the road that goes to the park. It's a Class B road, tar and chip. We had a really hard time even getting a yellow line up that road because people passing, and it gets pretty crazy on a Monday morning with school buses, garbage trucks, to consider this amount of housing included, and then just coming out onto Middleton Line. Now, the other road going through there is Highway 3, So every single one of those homes, all those people are going to be coming out of those on this tar and chip road to turn around in a big circle to go back up to Highway 3. So there is a liquor store where they have a house, kind of, they don't show, it just looks like it's like another subdivision road there. It's actually Highway 3. And there is an LCBO, and it's called Allen Road, and there is already the infrastructure and the planning and zoning has been done for that. If there was ever a housing subdivision that went in there, that would be the road. So it exists. They're just trying to kind of cover it up, and we want a traffic study done. So that's everybody that lives on Middleton Line and representing. So we request that the traffic study be done because nothing's being taken into account with Highway 3, even emergency vehicles on a Monday morning with school buses and the garbage truck. It's silly. And now there's more houses. It wasn't as silly when the initial plan came with about 30 houses. Now there's 50 something. So it's just, they need to go through where the liquor store is and make that a road, especially for the future development of Wheatley. The town blew up and they're going to be redoing stuff. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense. So we request the road, and we also request a fence, 10-foot fence go up when they do this construction. Yeah.
Council, do you have any clarifying questions you wish to ask the presenter? Seeing none, administration, do you have any comments based on any discussions you have? Or there's only one. This is the only one on this one, though. Oh, I apologize. I didn't see the second hand. So yes, please come up to the podium.
Hi, James Cunningham, 685 Middleton Line. I would ask you not to approve this plan before at least some of you drive the area. Like Rory said, there's going to be 48 houses, average 100 cars, all driving out on the Middleton Line, most of them taking Harbour Road, which is a very small road, and there's always children playing on it, always. There's many of the homes there have signs up, please reduce your speed. And these are cars that are doing 50. They're asking to reduce their speed. Please come and see the neighborhood for yourselves before approving this. 100 cars that are going to come out on the Middleton Line that's falling to pieces with no sidewalk. That'll be at least 150 people. A lot of whom will be walking to Wheatley Provincial Park with no sidewalk on a busy road. The idea that there's no access to Talbot Trail is ludicrous. Everybody wants to go to Talbot Trail, no matter where they're going. So I'm just saying, please don't accept this as is. That's it.
Did we miss anyone? Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I haven't used this machine in a few years, so I'm going to try to demonstrate some things on the plan, Mr. Mayor, if I may. So with regard to the comments regarding the condition of Middleton Line and the adequacy of Middleton Line, so Middleton Line, I may not be able to do this here. My apologies, Mr. Mayor. In the image on the screen, Middleton Line is located at the very bottom of the screen. So this is to the south. Across the road from this location is the boundary of Wheatley Provincial Park, as was stated. This draft plan of subdivision proposes both road accesses to be to Middleton Line through a public information center hosted by the developer, as well as through emails and calls to Planning Services Division of the municipality. This is a concern that we've heard from neighbors and residents in the community of Wheatley. Middleton Line is designated as an urban collector road. So that means in planning terms that over the planning horizon of 20 years, this road is planned to accommodate higher volumes of traffic. But that's not to say that the current condition in the design of the road would meet our current urban collector road standard, however that is planned. While Middleton Line itself could accommodate this level of traffic, the upgrade of Middleton Line to an urban collector standard, which would include new asphalt, curb, gutter, lighting, sidewalks, etc. This is something that is in the Transportation Master Plan as a project to prioritize in the future as priority and capital budget dollars are available to do such a project. So in the long term, this would be a road upgrade that is planned at some time in the future. However, there is also the opportunity to pursue an access at the Talbot Trail. The municipality does own 2 rights of way on the south side of Talbot Trail, which is at the top of the screen, or the north side of this property. One of those rights of way is effectively the LCBO driveway and a portion of their parking lot, if you're familiar with that location in Wheatley. The other is 5 lots to the west, which is currently utilized by the abutting neighbors as a bit of an extra driveway. But these 2 rights of ways would otherwise be available for road connections to Talbot Trail. However, there is a constraint to the developer in this case because those rights of way do not actually connect to the developer's land. In between these subdivision lands and those rights of ways, or even the backyards of the houses to the north, is a former municipal alleyway, probably about 20 feet wide, which is currently in private ownership. So this developer doesn't have ownership of all the lands to those rights of way at this time. That would need to be pursued in order to gain access to Talbot Trail. It would also require modification of the draft plan in order to achieve that outcome. If that's something that council would like further consideration of, certainly something we could bring back to the developer. However, the recommendation stands. I do support the recommendation. This project is viable and it meets the planning policies of Chatham-Kent's official plan as it's presented to council. Could there be alternatives? Yes, but as I said, this proposal does meet the municipality's requirements for a subdivision of this size. Thank you.
May I speak one more time?
No.
May I speak one more time?
No. Plain.
So
No.
I think it should be.
Sorry, there's no further deputations. I apologize.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we are
It-
granting that traffic study.
Councillor Anderson and Councillor Doyle, can I get you to move this, please?
I'll move it, but I have some questions.
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So would we be able to delay this plan until there is a traffic study done?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, there was not a traffic impact study done for this proposal. It was reviewed by our traffic engineers, and based on the number of lots and the location on an urban collector road, one was not required. If council so desired a traffic impact study to be completed, my suggestion would be that council could add it as a condition of approval, but what that would mean is council would give approval of the plan with a number of the conditions that are set out in the report in Appendix D. There's about 30 or so. We could add one. And a traffic study, generally what a traffic study will inform the municipality of is the adequacy of the existing road network in its present and future states to accommodate those traffic, and any potential modifications that would need to be done to the road network outside of this subdivision. So they would look at things like major intersections and minor intersections, curves, road widths and things of that nature. Council should not expect that a traffic study would be the type of document that would give further support or detract from the proposal. It would simply inform the municipality a little bit better on what it might expect in the future as far as the function of our streets in the area.
Madam, I'm sorry, you can't speak out during council. Thank you.
Yeah, because I mean, I have to admit, I did think, I mean, if you look at the top one, if you look at, lot, 676, which is the one that has the LCBO on it, it was my understanding that that was going to be a right-of-way into that subject property from Talbot Trail. And I have to agree, going down Middleton right now with the current amount of houses that are on there, it is quite busy and there is no sidewalks. And now we're gonna add another like 48 dwellings. It's a lot.
So I think I have the pointer now, so I'll do it on this one. So this, where I'm pointing now, this is a municipal right-of-way here, which is occupied by the LCBO driveway. This is another right-of-way here that's municipally owned, which is generally occupied by the neighbors. The situation exists where there's a 20-foot former alleyway between the developer's lands and those lots to the north, which is privately owned. That would need to be acquired first by the developer to gain legal access across those lands. But that's something that if council desired, it could send this back, and we would work with the developer on a solution to gain a single access or two accesses, whatever might be appropriate, to Talbot Trail.
Okay, so thank you, Judy. Do I do a motion for that?
So you could, there's a motion on the floor, but you could motion to refer back to administration for X.
So I would like to refer back, put a motion forward to refer back to administration to see about access on Talbot Trail.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I may advise council, not opposed to sending the draft plan back, but if council otherwise has no concerns with regard to the general size of the lots and the housing type, I might put to council a recommendation to continue to consider approving as recommended the zoning portion of this and just not the plan of subdivision, if I may.
Ryan, can you explain that a little bit more so we can make sure we understand what you're asking?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are two applications before council tonight. One of them is the draft plan of subdivision, which is the drawing on the screen before council. What this application would seek is approval of the actual layout of the roadways, the road widths, the lots, the size of the lots, their width and length, the location of the municipal parkland and stormwater management facility. So these are the design elements which we would bring back to the developer based on the motion of council to reconfigure those lots. However, the zoning would simply, the other application is for a zoning bylaw amendment. Currently, these lands are zoned what's called deferred development, so they're effectively not zoned for anything. What a deferred development zone means is that until something is proposed, whatever exists there is the only thing that is permitted. So that's the current state of the zoning on these lands. The zoning application seeks to change these lands to a low-density residential zone, which would otherwise accommodate this particular size of lot and the single detached or semi-detached housing. So by approving the zoning, that would enable this draft plan of subdivision or some modification of it to go forward at a future date and still allow that housing type in that zone. But yeah, sorry, I'll leave it there. Hopefully that explains.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So then would we split it into two? Would we then approve the zoning, but then defer back for, is that how that would work?
Ryan, can you go to the recommendation slide so we can see both?
No, here.
Is that what you're proposing is, number one is, I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Clerk. Yeah, based on what might be on the floor here, I would put to council that if it is really the layout of the subdivision that you would like to see maybe some more effort on, that would be to split the question. Consider following through and approving the zoning bylaw amendment, provided, council doesn't have objections with the overall intent of the application. And then number two would come back, and council should anticipate seeing that in the future at a regular council meeting.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to do that. I think that, all in all, this is a really great plan. Anytime that we're seeing, more subdivisions and more housing coming up, I think it's a great plan, for sure. But when I look at this and I see the layout of it and it coming to Middleton rather than going to a highway, I think that it definitely needs to be relooked at, for sure. And I hope to get the support of council on that.
Councillor Doyle, will you support that amendment?
100%.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Pinsino.
Thank you, Worship. You're sending it back, or is the intent for this developer to acquire the property to put another road in? Through
Yeah.
you, Your Worship?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. To have an entryway instead of Middleton, even with the Middleton ones there, but also access to the actual highway.
Okay, I don't know that that's fair that we tell a developer that he has to go and acquire land, because guaranteed that price of that land just tripled today. Traffic study I don't have a problem with, but I think you're handcuffing our developers in order, making them go and acquire land, just make another laneway in. I'm in support of it the way it's printed, but I would not be an objection to doing a traffic study. But I just don't think that's fair. And what message are we sending to the developers? We need housing. These people are doing it. My opinion.
I apologize, Mr. Mayor, and to the councillor. I was conferring with our legal. Perfect.
Where we're at? Oh, Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just a question. Do we have any sense from the developer, Ryan, what sending this back and would it cause any delays? Would it impact their plans for moving forward with this project?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a good question. The developer's agent, Mr. Robert Brown, is here, and I believe he'd be taking the opportunity to address council.
Yes, at this point, can I call up the applicant to address the question?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the councillor's question. The planned timeline for this, if it's approved, is to start construction in the fall of 2023 or spring of 2024. So anything that additional is required, traffic study, trying to acquire lands we don't own to gain access to Talbot will delay this project from starting, yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the response. I tend to agree with Councillor Pinsino with this. After reading the report, I know we need housing and it meets all the criteria. So I'm in support of supporting the whole motion tonight. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll be voting on the referral of item 2 first. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So on the referral, is that gonna have a traffic study, or is this traffic study gonna go ahead?
So for council's sake, Councillor Anderson is making a referral back to administration for a traffic study. So she's referring recommendation 2 back to administration. If that passes, then we will just vote on number 1. If that fails, we'll vote on 1 and 2, if that helps.
So with that, we'll put it to vote.
So what you're voting on now is to refer number 2 back to administration for a traffic study. All votes are in. Motion fails 5-11.
So with that, we'll go back and vote on the original motion.
So council will now vote on number 1 and 2 in the report. All votes are in. Motion passes 15-1. Moving on to item 11G, application for zoning bylaw amendment, Indwell Community Homes, 55 Croydon Street, Community of Chatham City. Mr. Mayor, we have one conflict of interest, Councillor Story. Throughout the day today, I've received 14 emails and requests for deputation. 7 of them are emails only and have been forwarded to you at noon today. We have many that are present tonight, and we will begin with those after the presentation by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The municipalities received an application for zoning bylaw amendment of the property known municipally as 55 Croydon Street. For those of you familiar with the history of the property, this was the site of the former St. Anne Catholic Elementary School here in Chatham. Property is approximately 2.5 acres in area and does contain the existing school building. The purpose of the application received by Indwell Community Homes is to permit the redevelopment of the site into a 95-unit affordable rental residential development with support services for tenants. Each of the residential units would be complete with a kitchen, bathroom, living space, and bedroom. The development is proposed to include associated support staff areas, amenity and community spaces, and the project is proposed to go forward in 2 phases. The plan of the applicant for phase 1 is to reuse the existing school building and convert it into 24 residential units, including studio and 1-bedroom apartments, offices, common space, laundry facilities, and other amenity areas, including the existing gymnasium on the property. The second phase is planned to include a new 3-story L-shaped addition to the rear of the gymnasium in the northerly half of the property. It is proposed that this addition will be comprised of 71 residential units, comprised of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units, additional offices, common spaces, and laundry facilities. The conceptual site plan shown on the screen demonstrates toward the right the existing 1-story school building, which would be comprised of phase 1, as I just described. Then here, in what is currently the former school playground or field, is the addition that is proposed to be 3 stories in that location, as well as ancillary parking, pathways, and landscaping on the property. The particulars of the zoning bylaw amendment, they're fairly straightforward. It's to rezone the subject lands, which is currently zoned institutional, to a site-specific institutional zone that will add supportive housing as an additional permitted use at the property. The municipal zoning bylaw does not currently have an appropriate definition for this type of housing. Therefore, this recommendation before council would actually have this definition included in the zoning for this particular property here. And I'll read that now. Supportive housing means public, private, or non-profit owned housing that provides supports for people who have specific needs beyond economic needs, which may include but are not limited to mobility requirements or support functions required for daily living. In addition to adding supportive housing and its associated definition to the zoning bylaw, the recommendation also seeks to establish a minimum off-street parking requirement of 0.5 spaces per unit. That represents, at full build-out of the site at 95 units, would be 48 required parking spaces. With respect to conformity of this application to the municipal official plan, this proposal to bring supportive housing to our community meets a very high objective in our municipal housing strategy, as well as the municipal official plan to bring much needed supportive housing to the community of Chatham-Kent. The Indwell Community Homes has acquired this property and owns this property today for this purpose as it pursues all of the necessary approvals and other project management milestones that it must achieve before realizing this proposal. This proposal has been reviewed in the context of the provincial policy statement and Chatham-Kent official plan and aligns with the purpose and intent of these documents. Therefore, it is recommended that zoning bylaw amendment application file D14 C1523I to rezone the subject lands notice 55 Croydon Street in the community of Chatham to a site-specific institutional 1670 zone to A, add supportive housing as an additional permitted use, and B, set the minimum off-street parking requirement for supportive housing use at 0.5 spaces per unit, be approved, and the implementing bylaw be adopted. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, we will start with the deputations this evening. So I have 8 on my list, and after that, we will ask if there's any additional after that. So we'll start with Sheila Martin, and on deck is Lisa Series. Just in front of you, Sheila, there's a button on the microphone. There you go. Thanks.
Mayor, council, and members of the public, my name is Sheila Martin and I own my house on Summonin Avenue. I've lived there for 17 years. My house is 4 houses from the St. Agnes property. I can see the property from my front yard. I walk down Summonin every day. It is a beautiful, quiet, treed neighborhood. Most of the houses were built in the 1960s and they are primarily one-story detached bungalow homes. I did provide you with pictures. A lot of my neighbors are elderly retirees, and there are a lot of families with children. I love this area, and I wouldn't live anywhere else in Chatham-Kent. I grew up on the north side of Chatham. My family lived in one of the townhouses on Summonin that backs onto the Indwell property when I was a child. The first home I bought was on Wood Street. This area is very important to me, and that's why I am working so hard to save it. It was my plan to live in this home until I went into a retirement home. I don't want to be forced to sell my home and leave the area. My neighbors and I are okay with it being affordable housing, and we were also okay when we thought the property was going to be 35 units, the size that Indwell told the public would be built there in 2021 when they bought the property. Since then, Indwell has tripled the build size to 95 units and 3 stories high. The highest building in this area is 2 stories high. From McNaughton to Sandy to Grand Avenue, a 3-story high building does not fit with the existing neighborhood. The zoning of institutional supportive care does not belong in this neighborhood. This is not an institutional area. It's a residential area that had a school for children that lived in the area. For that reason, the property should be zoned residential low density. The maximum height should be 2 stories and the maximum number of units should be the original plan of 35 units. I'm very afraid of Indwell and I'm afraid of what this property will become. People in recovery should not be housed in the same building as vulnerable children. 8 of the units are two-bedroom units. 8 of the units are two-bedroom units that could potentially have children living in them. 95 units is too large for this property. Many of the units are one-bedroom units that could have 2 people living in them. That could potentially be 150 people living on this property. People in recovery should not be stacked together. This is a recipe for disaster. It will not help with their recovery. It could actually hurt the residents and hinder their recovery. I went to the Capitol Theater screening. I was trying to keep an open mind. Most of the tenants I saw were smoking. Where are the tenants going to smoke? There's no green space on this property for the tenants. There is no playground for children. There's no outdoor community picnic area for them to get fresh air and nature. Where will they go? They will go to Percy Park and St. Agnes Church property. Vulnerable children utilize Percy Park. I thought Indwell's whole philosophy was to blend the people in recovery into a community, into a residential area. This is not blending. The planned building does not blend into the existing neighborhood. It's a massive structure that will be all concrete and parking lot. The best plan for this property is to build something that will match the existing fabric of the neighborhood. These are my recommendations. The zoning should be changed to residential low density. Limit the size of the property to 2 stories high and 35 units. The property should have a playground for children who are tenants. The property should have green space for a picnic area, a community garden where tenants can have their own small plot to grow something. There should be a dedication on the property to honor the memory of Miles Newts, who tragically died on this site 25 years ago. We must not forget about that. Mayor and municipal councilors, I urge you to vote no to changing the zoning of the property to institutional supportive housing. I also urge you to work with Indwell to reduce the size of the project. Help it to fit with the existing residential neighborhood so it sets itself up for success. I have spoken to many of my neighbors who have lived here for decades. They feel like they're being forced to sell their homes after the Indwell property is built. These are people who have worked their whole lives to pay for their homes. Is it fair to destroy this property? Is it fair to destroy this neighborhood? The tenants in the Summonin townhouses are renters. Many of them are middle-aged women concerned for their safety because of the Indwell development. They feel they will be forced to move. But to where? Where can they afford to move? You must consider the impact on the existing neighborhood in your decision today. Homelessness and affordable housing is a community problem. It's not just a north side problem. It is incredibly unfair to dump this problem on one neighborhood. If Indwell wants to build 150 units in the municipality, spread it out. Build another property on the south side. Thank you.
Next speaker is Lisa Series, followed by Annette Charlton.
Do I have to say where I live too? Sorry, just want to make sure. Okay, so my name's Lisa Series. I live on 11 Aspen Close here in Chatham. I strongly disagree with the proposed rezoning due to the size. When addressing issues of planning, I have read over carefully Edwell's planning justification report submitted to the city, and I found some inconsistencies and concerns with points made concerning planning. Throughout the report, Edwell addresses the issue of the scale and height of the building and refers to the cedar trees as a solution to the privacy issues. My concern is that the current cedars are near the end of their lifespan and barely cover the height of the 2-story townhouses currently there. A 3-story apartment building is going to be much higher than those cedars, towering over the homes and the backyards of those houses. The privacy of these homeowners are in direct violation, and to say that cedars that are not permanent fixtures will solve the problem of privacy is irresponsible and careless. It is suggested that there are other 3-story buildings in residential areas. I found it difficult to find one in Chatham. Most 3-story apartment buildings in Chatham are either on a busier traffic road or an area that contains multi-unit dwellings. None have the residential architecture that surrounds St. Agnes School. What was missed in the report is the majority of the homes in that area are single-story bungalows. These are very low-to-the-ground homes as per the architecture of that time. Even the church follows the same architecture, being one of the shortest churches in our community. A 3-story apartment in this area will jeopardize the privacy and current views of the neighbors, as well as stand out against the current architecture. To quote Edwell's report, they said, "The apartment dwelling will not drastically change from what the neighborhood has grown accustomed. This is completely dishonest. The new apartment is not a retrofit of the current St. Agnes School, but a complete overhaul and a drastic change to what is there now. It should be noted that the first idea from Edwell was not to make a high-density apartment, but to retrofit the current property. Throughout the report, Edwell's experience building social housing has been noted, and I know councillors are relying a lot on this facility to answer the problems of social housing. However, Edwell themselves have been quoted many times on the importance of keeping a facility like this manageable. Specific comments directed to the St. Agnes site includes the importance of making the building blend with the community. A 3-story building is not going to blend. Even at the last council meeting, Edwell commented that the building could be recalibrated to less units. I'm afraid we are overlooking what is manageable for this area because other needs in the community. Please do not look at this site as a quick fix. Shouldn't we be looking to diversify by providing multiple locations? When thinking of planning, I would be concerned that we have many buildings in our city that have the potential to sit empty, such as St. Ursula's School. Wouldn't it make more sense to spread these services throughout the town, to provide multiple housing types throughout the city, which should be noted, Edwell originally suggested that model as the best solution for Chatham. In regard to traffic planning, all surrounding roads leading to the apartment do not have sidewalks. It has been mentioned that most of these residents will not have vehicles, so I assume they will be walking or riding bikes. This will be very dangerous to think that all traffic will be on the road or people's front yards. I do worry that if sidewalks are later considered to be added for safety, this is going to be additional costs for the city. Have we considered the bus route? Will it be rerouted to facilitate perhaps 98 individuals that will need to consider city transportation? Adding more traffic to a very narrow road, again, additional funding. In addition, Edwell's justification report asked the city to approve a lot coverage increase from 33 to 36%. This should be a red flag immediately to council as it demonstrates that the building is too large for the site. If the site was right, the apartment would fit and it would not be required to increase. Do not increase the lot coverage. The proposed building already has very little to no green space. Where are the residents supposed to enjoy sitting outside, going for a smoke? In the parking lot? Speaking of the parking lot, the number of parking spots in the plan have been reduced and do not follow Chatham-Kent bylaws. So now we have a smaller parking lot, no green space, and an oversized building. This building cannot be zoned to approve a high-density building in this location. All points in the planning have been negatively affected by this proposal. The height violates people's privacy, does not fit with current architecture, lack of traffic planning, increased infrastructure, additional taxpayers' costs, and overall perimeter of the building does not fit the current site. Please listen to your city members. A high-density dwelling is not what the people of Chatham-Kent want to see built in their small subdivisions.
Next speaker is Annette Charlton, followed by Stan Mazeppa. Annette Charlton, you're up. Stan Mazeppa, you're on deck.
Annette Charlton, 119 Summonin. Not used to talking in front of people, so bear with me. My name is Annette Charlton. I've lived in Stacy subdivision for 43 years. I attended the March 6th council meeting where $9.7 million was approved by council for St. Agnes Indwell project. I was shocked and disappointed that council would vote to approve this without having all questions answered, just so Indwell could meet their deadline for submitting a request for additional government funding, which in my mind should have had no influence to rush the vote. This leaves me with a few questions. Since the meeting, has Indwell reached out to council to negotiate a smaller project? There was talk about this at the March 6th meeting when it was looking as if the vote may not go in their favor. Has Indwell shared additional information with council, as I mentioned during the same meeting, that they would have in a few weeks? It seems that Indwell has done neither, because the current zoning paperwork, they are not requesting a reduction in units. Did this all go away when they had the money in their hands? I agree that there is a need for supportive housing in the municipality, but I also believe the entire municipality should share the responsibility. Should one neighborhood, which is comprised of predominantly single-family homes, be drastically changed? Should one neighborhood be subjected to the negative effects of having an institutional building forced upon it without proper due diligence? Should one neighborhood be put in a position where the safety of the families within the neighborhood could be compromised with such a large project? There are similar facilities in other cities, as well as in Chatham, that have seen increases in crime within their neighborhoods. Graham Cubitt, Director of Projects at Indwell, is quoted in the Hamilton Spectre newspaper saying, "Indwell will not build another high-needs facility as large as Parkdale Landing again. Parkdale Landing has 57 units. The proposal is for 95 units, with one building being 3-story. I would like to know what has changed to convince Mr. Cubitt to build a facility almost twice the size of what he said he would never do. I love my neighborhood, and I'm sure each of you feel the same about the neighborhood that you live in. I'm not saying not in my neighborhood, and I believe most living in Stacy subdivision would say the same. This responsibility should be shared in the community. I am asking that council work with Indwell to reduce the number of units to better suit the area and build a facility that will harmonize with the current neighborhood. I am asking council to vote no on the zoning proposal. Thank you.
Next speaker is Stan Meza, followed by Janet O'Hara.
Sorry, what was the name?
Stan Meza, followed by Janet O'Hara.
Sorry, I couldn't hear over the clapping there. It's recommended that the municipality of Chatham-Kent not grant Indwell the zoning change which would be inconsistent with the surrounding area. Reasons being Indwell buildings wouldn't be consistent with the surrounding neighborhood architecture. Most structures in the former Stacy subdivision are single detached homes with a few 2 stories. The 3-story proposal is inconsistent with the area, and Indwell hasn't been fully transparent with their proposal in their first request for 24 units to their second phase of 95 units, which was never initially proposed nor disclosed. The exits from the parking lot onto Seminole would cause extreme congestion and safety concerns for children, seniors, and people walking their dogs in the area. The sanitary sewers on Seminole Ave and Croydon Ave wouldn't accommodate that many more residents in a small space, which is low-density area, nor could the water drainage system handle more residents. Even though the former site of the school was listed as an institution in a residential area, this does not mean that the activity of Indwell would fall in the same definition and should be excluded by the fact that it's surrounded by total residential area. The activity of Indwell would also be similar to that of a commercial business, even though they describe themselves as nonprofit business but require extensive funding from all public sectors. The nonprofit business would not fit in a residential zone. Other considerations that may result in more bylaw infractions. There are many people in Stacy subdivision who are opposed to this project, and their concerns aren't unique to Chatham-Kent, which other areas of the municipality already expressed similar concerns where there were homeless and temporary shelters set up in their areas. Specifically, I'm referring to Merritt Ave, Dolson Road, Victoria Park Place, and all these concerns were well documented in the local news, and similar issues were brought up at Chatham-Kent Council meetings before. Mississauga has also had a petition trying to block similar projects in their area. Similarities will occur in this suburbia as there have been in other areas, such as yelling and screaming all hours of the night, which will cause more municipality bylaw infractions and more costs to the police force, as attested by the police chief recently in his annual report. Similarities to what's found under the bridge, such as used contaminated needles and other drug paraphernalia, will occur on resident streets where children, adults, puppies, kittens walk and play. There will be intentional and unintentional trespassing and loitering on suburban streets and loitering in nearby Percy Park, smoking and doing other drugs while children there watch their mothers play softball in the women's baseball league. Conclusion, Indwell is not a suitable fit in the middle of a residential area, nor are the buildings appropriate to the surrounding area. This business would be more suitable in a commercially zoned area or a place similar to former Southwest Regional Center. Recommendations: do not grant Inwell the rezoning request. They do not fit in a residential area.
Thank you. Next speaker is Janet O'Hara, followed by Jackie LaRose. Janet O'Hara, followed by Jackie LaRose.
Good evening. My name is Janet O'Hara, and I own a residence, 15 Sussex Street, and have lived here for over 30 years. I do not live next door, but definitely consider this location part of my neighborhood. I've enjoyed many years of playing baseball at Percy Park, and I'm concerned with what may become of this park. I'm looking through this through the lens that I've seen driving down Missioner these days, which is not a pretty sight. There's a lot of garbage all over, visible vagrancy, and as well as panhandling. For many years, I walked or more often biked around my neighborhood with the intent of doing this much more often in my retirement years, and now feel I've planned for nothing. I've planned renovations to age in place and feel this is not likely going to happen. I don't believe this will continue to be the quiet, safe community that I bought into so many years ago. Most of my neighbors have lived here for many years, decades even, and contributed a significant amount of money to the city tax base, and the fact that I'm now approaching my retirement years, having thought I invested wisely, only to find out that the city wants more money from me, my share, the $9.7 million, for this project that is practically guaranteed to decrease my property value, leaves me disappointed, to say the least. I know many of my neighbors have shared the pros and cons of this project, so I believe that is covered, and I'm only sharing my personal feelings for everyone's time's sake tonight. I've heard about the 35-unit structure to be developed at St. Agnes location and thought it was a good plan, as this city needs affordable housing. I attended the information night at the Capitol Theater, hoping to find out more about what was going on, and found the number to be saying 95. Many of the ideas shared previously have been changed during this meeting. The idea of on-site security 24 hours a day changed to nobody actually being on site for that security between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. after about a year. The idea that supportive care is changed to partnerships with already overburdened community services. The zoning of institutional with supportive care does not belong in this neighborhood. This is not an institutional area. For that reason, the property should be zoned residential low density. The current area zoning is low and medium density, which the 35-unit development is keeping in with the blends with the neighborhood, rather than the 95-unit structure will dramatically change the flavor of the neighborhood. Much more high density and out of place in the slow density neighborhood. The maximum height of any other structure in the neighborhood is 2 stories, and I believe this is what will fit into this community. I would like to see the Chatham-Indwell project succeed, and the development needs community support to be successful, and is much more likely to get it with a 35-unit plan than the last-minute change to 95 units, with the surrounding community being given little to no opportunity for meaningful dialogue in advance. The project does not seem to allow sufficient green space for the residents or the community garden as shown in the video, or even a smoking area, as most of the residents shown in the Indwell video were doing. Since Indwell's goal was to create 150 units in Chatham-Kent over a 5-year period, I believe putting 2/3 of those units in a low-density residential neighborhood is a poor decision. The 35-unit proposal is much more in keeping with the original plan and can more fairly distribute the 150 planned units throughout the entire municipality, including smaller communities outside the city of Chatham. Please, Mr. Mayor and municipal councils, I urge you to vote no to changing the zoning. I hope you are able to work with Indwell and reduce the size of this project back to the 2-story, 35-unit original plan, which will fit in with the existing neighborhood so it can be success that we all hope for. Please consider the impact of this project on the entire neighborhood. Thank you for your consideration in this matter tonight.
Next speaker is Jackie LaRose, followed by Tanya Chura.
Mayor, council members, thank you for allowing us to speak tonight. About this housing project, we have a lot of concerns. I'm concerned for my family, for my son, for our safety. We've been in this neighborhood with my family for over 30 years. We own property in this neighborhood. It's been home. I always come back. Even when I move away, I come back because this is home. My concern is with this size of a property, it won't feel like home anymore. I won't be able to leave my door unlocked or go sit in my gazebo and enjoy the weather. We'll be afraid. I don't think this is fair to my neighbors, for my children, for my family and my friends. I feel like a development this size really should be zoned in another area. We feel like we can no longer trust anything that's going on in this procedure anymore because any information we've originally been given has changed and multiplied. The area demographics consist of single mothers, elderly, and young couples with young children. An area of this size doesn't seem wise. What's their plan to ensure the safety of the people already living in this neighborhood? What are their plans to add additional lighting to the streets, to the parks? Will there be monitoring on and off the premises? Our biggest concern is people with untreated mental health issues, going off medications, drug and alcohol abuse, all placed in a small area around vulnerable women, seniors, and children. Is there someone who will take the liability of cleaning up trash and possible drug paraphernalia? Is there somebody who will take responsibility and liability for the decreased property value of homeowners and the decrease in rent that landlords are going to be receiving? My children walk to school. I don't think I'd feel safe letting them walk to school anymore with something this size in our community. I completely agree with everyone who's spoken before me that doing it in a smaller size and spreading it out among the community would certainly be a better choice here. So thank you very much. I'm not very good at public speaking, but thank you for your time.
Tanya Chura, and last speaker is Clark Schultz.
My name is Tina Chura. I live on Sediment Avenue, Unit 4, in a fourplex. I wanted to say I have a 7-year-old son. My mom has next-thing to MS, and there is many vulnerable young people, young kids, adults, anyone in the neighborhood, vulnerable people, 7-year-old boy, and there's many, many kids in the neighborhood. And I'm very scared for my son. There could be needles around, and that my son could get one of those needles because he will grab anything that's shiny at all. And I just want to stress that I'm scared for this. I really am scared. I have 2 letters that I'm gonna hand over, and I'm not very good at it at public speaking, but I totally disagree with this whole thing. I am fully on helping the homeless, but this size is totally unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Clark Schultz.
Thank you. Mayor Caniff, Municipal Governance Clerk Judy Smith, and members of our Municipal Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak and share my thoughts on the proposed zoning change being considered here tonight. My name is Clark Schultz, and I own properties in 2 areas of the city and reside in both. One of my homes backs onto St. Agnes Schoolyard. I've had it for 25 years. The other is in the Tecumseh Park neighborhood, not far from the current municipally run emergency homeless shelter known as Victoria Park Place. I realize that the Victoria Park Place facility is designed to deal with individuals at a different point on the continuum of care for those experiencing homelessness. The issues we now face in the Tecumseh Park neighborhood over the past year gave rise to many questions regarding the proposed in-dwell facility in terms of its size, their staffing qualifications and complement, the programs for helping residents with mental health and addiction issues, and their procedures involving residents who need to be moved on because they prove not to be a good fit for Indwell and the surrounding community. We researched Indwell facilities, went to all the community involvement activities and open houses that they had, went into every room in St. Agnes School, listened to what others in our St. Agnes community said at those events, and our question list grew. Eventually, I think we had 50 questions we wanted answered. We visited the St. Agnes School site on our own and met with managers Scott and Natasha and have exchanged emails with them. We found Indwell to be honest, detailed, and forthright in answering our many questions. We knew from the first open house that we attended that the St. Agnes facility would have a 3-story addition, that there would be about 90 dwelling units, that it would provide 3 levels of care for its residents, that they would hope to begin construction on all 3 phases as soon as possible, should the funding be there, and that they were actively seeking that funding. If the funding came in stages over time, then that would be how they would proceed with the construction. Their answers to our questions about staffing, programs, and procedures put our minds at ease, and we found them to be open to suggestions. Once safely housed in the units Indwell builds, the residents work together with the Indwell staff to manage both their new homes and their health. In this way, the previously marginalized have a fighting chance at becoming contributing members of their community. It is our belief that Indwell's goal is to be a positive presence in the neighborhoods where they have residents. They have been welcoming, inclusive, and respectful to us. We have traveled to other communities with existing Indwell residents, and we have visited those. Their residents are visually appealing, and while they may not have been in residential areas, they were around the corner or across the street or parking lot from them. In one case, there was a coffee shop within the Indwell facility with a steady stream of families, young moms with children in strollers, and cyclists entering and leaving the coffee shop. We urge the council to vote yes on the zoning bylaw amendment, and it is our hope that Indwell will develop similar facilities in other communities of Chatham-Kent. The issues of homelessness, unaffordable rent, and people needing assisted living services exist throughout our community, and people need access to facilities like this in all our towns. In the future, should concerns or questions arise for Indwell, we plan on sharing those with them, and we would encourage other concerned people in our neighborhood to do the same. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that we missed that wants to get up and say something? Seeing none, the applicant, do you wish to share any comments regarding the report or comments that you've heard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is David French with Story Samways Planning in Chatham, and our firm was retained to assist Indwell Community Homes with the Planning Act portions of the project. I thank the neighbors for speaking tonight, and I appreciate their comments and concerns. I don't necessarily recognize all of the concerns as planning concerns. A lot of the concerns are social and not necessarily handled best through the planning process. I would like to speak just briefly on a couple specific points that was mentioned, through the deputations. The first thing I would like to highlight is that this is not a homeless shelter. This is a dwelling that offers supportive services to its tenants. And when I say tenants, I would like to also highlight the fact that the tenants pay rent in this facility. The tenants have their own cooking and eating facilities. The tenants will reside in this building just as any person in this room would reside in their own dwelling. Another issue I would like to speak to is the idea of residential versus institutional uses. When Indwell came forward and made the application to the municipality, at the time, the idea was to have this rezoned as a residential use, residential zoning. Through the very exhaustive consultation process with staff and the community, it was thought, or I guess it was suggested by staff, that although there is a residential component involved with this project, it does indeed have an institutional component, and that institutional component is supportive services, whether it's social, economic, or just general health services. So as the application progressed, it was suggested again by staff that we look at an institutional zoning which would permit the residential use, and that residential use would be permitted through the implementation or adoption of the new definition of supportive housing. That new definition covers off the residency, and it covers off the assistance provided by Indwell. So knowing that this is now going forward, at least as recommended, as an institutional zone, we look at the institutional zone performance standards. A number of people indicated that there was no green space on site. It was all one big parking lot. That is in fact not true. The institutional zone allows for up to 40% lot coverage. The Indwell proposal proposes 36%. The institutional zone requires a minimum of 33% landscaped open space. Indwell is proposing 40%. The maximum permitted height within an institutional zone is 11 meters. The Indwell model proposes a maximum height of 10.7 meters. There are no zone-specific performance standards required to see this project move forward, aside from the need to reduce parking. And again, the institutional zone permits a number of institutional uses, one of them being a nursing home. Another one is a senior citizen shelter. Both of those uses provide overnight accommodation. Both of those uses could be built today as of right at the existing footprint, at the existing height that Indwell is proposing for their supportive housing project. Again, it comes back to the social interpretation. It's unfortunate that people have labels. I label people as people. All people need a place to live. Chatham-Kent Council, past councils, have very strong and clear policies within the official plan to provide housing for all demographics, all people. This project simply implements what Chatham-Kent Council today and past has requested. So if there's any questions of council, I'd be happy to answer. And I do have representatives of Indwell here also, if there's anything that should be directed to them.
Is there any questions of the speaker? Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Mr. French, with all due respect, I find keeping the institutional label on this property seems a little murky to me. To me, it's a high-density residential apartment building. Like you'd suggested that there will be a residential component, and I would argue that's the primary purpose of this development is residential component. So by keeping the institutional zoning, it allows for many of the things that you just mentioned that it adheres to. But in my opinion, supportive housing as an additional permitted use seems a backward kind of way of doing it. Like the residential, the high density apartment building clearly is the primary. And if they were going to sell ice cream, then a suggested permitted use would be selling ice cream. I see that you somewhat understand what I'm saying. So to me, I don't find this zoning is proper. Like, for instance, St. Andrew's Terrace, you know what I'm talking about? Not the residence, but the terrace. What would that be zoned?
I would have to defer to one of the planners who has access to the zoning map.
Okay. But that is a high-density condo. But it has supported services. You can have meals and a nurse will visit. But I bet it's not zoned industrial or institutional. So I just question the zoning label that we're giving. To me, this is a high-density residential application. And, you know, we're skirting things by using the institutional label. From what I can read, and I read it very thoroughly, you know, to the best of my ability. So I just question that, and you can respond to me on, you know, what I've brought up. You seem to understand what I'm saying.
Do you want to? Through Mayor Caniff to Councillor Bondi, thank you for your comments. Just speaking to the high density component, the residential component of the site, I recognize that Indwell is proposing 95 units containing full kitchen facilities, some 2-bedroom units. And again, I would refer back to a couple of the other permitted uses, the senior citizens dwelling or the nursing home, where again, those buildings could be built in the exact same footprint, the exact same height, perhaps even the one-story component of the existing school today could be turned into a 3-story building. And again, because they do not need the physical space for in-unit kitchen facilities, the actual density as a nursing home could be far, far greater than what is being proposed by the Indwell model. Now, as far as, you know, going the institutional zone route versus the residential zone route, I'm going to have to defer back to staff on that. Again, there was a lot of discussion that went back and forth, and through that discussion, it was staff's interpretation of what Indwell does, what it provides, was that it fit better into the institutional zone within Chatham-Kent. So I wouldn't say that we're trying to skirt things. I would just say that the proposed use has institutional components and it has residential components, and staff felt that the residential component really was accessory to the institutional component. So.
Oh, and thank you through you, Mayor Caniff. I understand your comparison, but we're not talking about a nursing home. This place is not going to act like a nursing home. It's not going to look like a nursing home, and it's not going to have the activity of a nursing home. Rest assured. That's a given. The institutional, I just feel that, you know, the institutional zoning works for this, right? For, like, if you want to see this thing happen. But to me, and I don't know if there's any way that I can argue this or appeal it or whatever, but if this isn't high-density residential, nothing is. Like, there's an institutional component. Sure, there's some services provided, et cetera, but primarily, I don't think anybody can really argue that this is not a high-density residential. And as you've commented on, everybody has their own cooking facilities, washrooms. These are, as is clear in the report, self-sufficient apartments. Almost 100 of them. If that's not high-density residential, then I don't know what is. Again, you know, using the institutional allows for this to work, but to me, it doesn't seem fair. Like, it just doesn't seem that it's really reflective of what this is going to be. It's going to be a high-density apartment building. And we're saying it's institutional because it works for that. So anyway, I'll leave that there. I don't know if I can argue that.
May I just have Brian, if he wants to add anything to the comments made.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, I did want to address the comments made by Mr. French just with regard to the extensive consultation and the suggestion of staff that this remain in the institutional zone. So I feel I should provide council with an explanation on that point. There are three factors that I generally considered with regard to what zone was appropriate for this use to recommend to council. The first was the request through the application of Indwell Community Homes, first and foremost. That's what initiated us being here tonight having this discussion. Indwell was applying not for any specific thing that's called a certain thing. It was applying for a residential use where supports are offered to its tenants. And that's exactly what's being recommended to council tonight. But my role and the role of planners and others in administration is to make the best recommendation in the interests of Chatham-Kent to Municipal Council, not solely on private applications generated by property owners. So the other two factors that were considered were what are the existing permitted uses at the site, and is there benefit to the community in having those uses continue to be permitted at the site? And secondly, what other proposals have come forward, if any? So in reviewing those two things, the existing zoning of this property is institutional. That permits a number of things, some of those being assembly hall, child care center or daycare, church, clinic, private club, senior citizen dwelling, library, a museum, nursing home, as an example. So if I was recommending just to zone this property solely for supportive housing and it was approved and it didn't materialize, the property is essentially not permitted to have anything else, which doesn't really make it viable on the market. It doesn't make it immediately viable to redevelop in the future. So there's value to Chatham-Kent in retaining the base zoning that already existed at the site, that's existed at the site for many decades, so they can provide value for Chatham-Kent in the long term, should the Indwell proposal not materialize as they're planning and as they've applied. The second is, well, why not a residential zone as a base zone, as a terminology? Well, the reason that I'm not recommending that is because there is no other proposal for a residential use. The only proposal before council is for supportive housing. So when evaluate the application and considering a residential zone, it becomes very speculative. What are we zoning it to? Medium density residential zone that permits a 95 unit market rental apartment? Sure, maybe, but that brings in a lot of other factors that otherwise don't need to be dealt with. For instance, a parking ratio of 0.5 spaces to one unit would never work, right? We'd go at least 1.2 spaces per unit. So all of a sudden we start getting into the need to plan zoning regulations for uses that are not even proposed. That's impossible. I can never stand up here and propose a zoning amendment to council on a property for something that no one's asking for. So bringing it back to the application, the recommendation before council squarely includes Indwell's proposal, and it also preserves the viability of this property as it currently is zoned without being speculative on some other future use that may or may not ever occur. So, thank you.
Councillor Doyle? You had a question?
Mayor Caniff, sorry, was I still able to?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Ryan, just to that, I'm just kind of confused as to when you say, you know, maintaining the industrial zoning is a value to the municipality. I think what these folks are saying is that they would rather it be zoned low-density residential. And then whoever owned it, which would be the school board, I assume, then would have sold it, then it would be, so that's the ask here. It's not that, you know, again, we're sort of going back to the zoning of industrial works for Indwell, right? But it doesn't work for the people that live around the place. Like, so that's why I'm just questioning this choice of zoning.
Right.
To me, seems tailored to Indwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The zoning is currently, the property is currently zone institutional.
Right, which we can change
Right.
like 5 times.
Yeah, and the ask here is the application of Indwell to bring supportive housing to this property. It's not to change it to low-density residential.
Right, so we're doing what they're asking. Yeah, I get it. Okay, fair enough. All right, sorry, I'll let you move on.
Councillor Doyle? Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Ryan, I just wondered, would Graham be around by any chance? Is he available to take any questions?
I believe so, yes.
Good evening, Your Worship. Graham Cubitt, Director of Projects and Development from Indwell.
Hey, Mayor. Graham, I guess last time I had a nice little talk with you in the council, and I did my yes vote because of our conversation, or a big part of my yes was because of our conversation. It was clear that a lot of people had concerns about the size of this and the 3 stories, and you at one point said, I hear your concerns, and we want to work with Chatham, and we're going to try to address some of those. And then we get this planning thing, and nothing's been changed. Not a thing. So when it came to anything that we had concerns about. So I'm just wondering why you stood up there and said, I hear your concerns, and I'm going to try to work with you. And you got some of our votes based on that, and then you didn't change anything. Can you let me know why?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Integrity is extremely important to me personally and to our organization, so I want to express our full commitment to transparency and to acknowledge the complexity of working through these complex design, funding, and planning processes. So the last time I was here, we were discussing sort of the viability of the project and whether it could be scaled. I indicated that without having done the math sort of thoroughly, you know, somewhat on the fly, yes, indeed, we could attempt to scale the project. And I did believe then, and we do believe now that that is possible. That being said, the proposal for the funding was around a 95-unit project, and a proportion of that funding being supported through the municipality in order to attract the maximum funding through CMHC, specifically the RHI application. In follow-up discussions with staff, the decision was made, the recommendations were made, if we stay with the current plan, the maximum zone, because this meeting was still yet in the future, we don't know what the future zoning will be, but we do know what the maximum that we would be capable of applying to RHI would be, and that was the 71 units that we applied to under RHI. So there's 2 different things sort of happening simultaneously: the opportunity to apply for the funding to be able to build 71 units, and the potential in the future to create 95 homes for people. And those are the 2 simultaneous processes that were ongoing. We don't believe that limiting the planning permission to the 71 necessarily contradicted what we discussed at council, because the vote that was held at council was around the full amount that was proposed, although there was discussion at that time about the possibility of scaling it.
So if you were to get all the funding, you would probably go forward with the 95 units in total?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the current application for the RHI funding is for 71 units that the municipality submitted to the Rapid Housing Initiative 3 application process. So at minimum, we would need to collectively build 71 units in order to honor those commitments to that funding application. Beyond the 71 units, there could be room for discussion about the viability of the project being maintained without necessarily having to hit 95 units.
I'm confused. So is the 71 units not for the new build, and then you have 24 units in the current school that you're going to retrofit?
Through you, that is the current intention, yes. That the 71 units would be to build new apartments through the Rapid Housing Program funding, with the conversion of the school into 24 apartments. There might be latitude within those programs, although I can't speak to that specifically because it would be within the nuances of the RHI 3 funding.
Okay, and if we were to drop how many units you were allowed on this location, because you've already got your application in, would that do anything to your application?
Would you be able to rephrase that question, sorry?
If we were to lower the amount of units that you're allowed on this lot, would that do anything to your application process that you've already started?
Mr. Mayor, point of order. We are voting on A and B, not the size of the housing, and I think council voted on the 9.7 million for the 95 units. That was what we voted on. So that's already, we voted on that already. It passed. So I just wanted to bring a point of order. I don't know if this is the right spot. The clerk will
Point
let
of
me
order,
know.
we haven't moved or seconded this thing yet.
Well, this is right now questions of the applicant, and we'll have questions of administration, then we'll put the motion forward, we'll go with all of that
And then,
at this
okay.
point. But yes, very much so
Great.
that we're dealing with these 2 points, and we know that we're gonna be coming back when the funding's in place. That's at that time, we can say, we don't want 95 units, we want this. This is very specific to just allow these 2 specific things. So I think that we are probably trying to get going a little off course, because council will have another opportunity to revisit the number of units and all that, because it's conditional upon coming back and making a motion.
Yeah, I guess I get that. My worry is they say they're gonna reduce some things like we've heard in the past, and they don't if they get approved for everything. So there's a potential to add a C to this amendment. I said, I believe there's an option to add a C to this zoning bylaw.
Well, we'll move on,
That's what I was asking.
because this is, right now, this is just a question of the applicant. After we put the motion on the floor, then we'll deal with those.
Okay. I'm finished.
Any other questions? Councillor Finn.
Thank you, Worship. When did this originally come to council? At the very beginning?
Through your worship, I believe that it was late 2020 was maybe our first conversation with council.
And what was the intended use at that time?
Our first conversation about this property was maybe in later 2021. After council supported Indwell and the community to advance, like, how do we solve this issue of homelessness? How do we advance the cause of supportive housing? Council supported Indwell's work in through a project manager and funding that role, along with NeighborLink providing matching funding. It was later in 2021, I believe, when we purchased the St. Agnes property and then worked through the past year towards the zoning. It was earlier this year around the budget season when we first specifically talked about any kind of numbers in towards a project or a proposal specifically related to how to secure federal funding through the Rapid Housing Program in order to support the project. So it was earlier this year, I believe that might have been February time.
Okay, it's nothing against supportive housing or the project per se. I agree on the size, but my concern is why from the beginning, it's always been supportive housing. Why is it just now coming to council, almost 2 years later, to be rezoned or added as supportive housing? That's my only question. Everything else has been asked.
Through you, your worship, I think that Ryan's comments about his recommendation that keeping the institutional zone was something that we concurred with as a recommendation, because you're right, we were not thinking of this as institutional use. It is a housing use. It is apartments. It's very critical for CMHC that housing be specifically allowed within zones, because they don't fund group homes, they don't fund emergency shelters, they don't fund temporary residences, those sorts of things. So it had to be permanent housing. The opportunity, though, within, I believe Ryan read a number of the allowed uses currently under the zone, are actually part of our response to the community's interest to keep things like the gymnasium, which, recreational or assembly hall space like that isn't allowed in a residential zone. So in a sense, we'd have to change to a residential zone and then allow these uses back into a residential zone, rather than adding the supportive housing use, which is specifically a part of this application. And so we believed, we concurred with staff's recommendation that this was a suitable and appropriate approach to meeting the needs of the project, and aligns with our stated and demonstrated approach to delivering supportive housing.
I just find it odd that we have given money now twice for supportive housing, and it hasn't been zoned as included for the institutional use. I find it kind of backwards, and would have thought that this would have been added right from the very beginning.
Can I get Ryan to comment on that? Because I think it's really Ryan's suggestion is why we're here with that now. Ryan, can you comment on that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So with respect to the timing of the planning application, Councillor, planning services began early communications with Indwell through their planning consultant, I believe in around mid to late August of last year. It materialized finally into an application on February 16th of this year. Now, during that time, between late August and February, there were a number of things happening. Certainly, there was a few back and forth communications with their planner. Of course, at the same time, internally and with council, they were preparing for the municipal budget, in which administration was also preparing, had awareness of this request that council considered at its deliberations. So I guess what I'm trying to say are there were other factors between August and now that affected the timing of this application that might not otherwise been the case with another application for another proposal.
Okay, seeing no other questions, sorry, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question. Grant, what are your other facilities labeled as? Like, I guess I just don't understand whether it's labeled institutional or high density, medium density, low density. Like, I don't understand. Are the rest of them zoned institutional?
Through your worship, many of our properties are actually zoned commercial. Or they're zoned commercial mixed use, but again, that allow a residential use within another use. So we're very familiar with having properties that aren't zoned residential, and therefore are very comfortable with the idea that while it might be an institutional use as the heading, as long as within that, the list of allowable uses, supportive housing is specifically mentioned, we have no problem at all with that, and are very comfortable with that sort of approach.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, it does provide additional benefits to having it be an institutional use, right? Because of the different things that you can then have in there, correct? As supports, as options, as all of that, right?
Through your worship, yes, it does. It's actually we believe a good recommendation from staff, as was described, because it does allow us on a larger property that does have many of those institutional physical features, the gymnasium, the assembly hall being one of them. We've talked to the community health center that would like to offer, programs for our tenants around, heart health or recovery from, from illness or other kinds of things. And those are uses that would be able to, be used in that hall. Or whether it's, floor hockey, we've had a number of people wanting to rent the gymnasium for, karate or youth programs and things like that. We don't ever build gymnasiums as part of our projects, but we have many times attempted to keep community facilities as part of projects that we have retrofitted or renovated, because we know that these kinds of facilities are difficult for communities to replace. It's too difficult, too expensive for the municipality to build gymnasiums, and churches don't go around building gyms and things like this anymore. So to keep those facilities and to allow them to be used under the zoning is really, we believe, a shrewd recommendation, a wise recommendation, and cost effective on behalf of planning staff. And so when they suggested that would be, that the current zoning with the additional definition of supportive housing actually gets more uses allowed that encompass the full spectrum of what Indwell would like to be able to facilitate for the community, we thought that made a lot of sense. And we also know that, as planning changes over time and as the province pursues further and further housing solutions, we need this kind of definition. And so when the definition was proposed, we fully aligned with the definition in the bylaw.
Yeah, thank you. And then I just have one further question. I'm guessing this is probably for Ryan. How does that change how this is taxed? Does it change that with the different labeling? Does it matter? Is there a benefit to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know exactly. I do know that that property had not been taxed when it was a school, as the school boards are exempt from local property taxes. With any project, any construction project, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation will conduct an assessment of the property and will evaluate the use, and MPAC will determine the property tax classification as well as an assessed value. So until MPAC does a reassessment, I really can't say.
Thank you.
Councillor Sakachi and Councillor Jubenville.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff, and through you to Graham. Graham, I know sometimes this is a challenging conversation to have. And when I moved, when this came prevalent again, I did go back into the meeting notes, and I do know that there was I think a 4-line recommendation with, I think, an A, B, and C. And I think that at that time would have been the time to talk about the unit size. I'll be very forthcoming. At the time, I definitely didn't support the amount. I did have a chance to go to the screening and speak to you, not to you directly, sorry, but to your team, and to many members of your team that were there and watched it, and it was actually very beneficial. I guess my question would be is from the how the funding goes. Is this, when you apply for funding, is it very much so a yes or no? Or as the potential to Mayor Caniff said previously, is there a potential for them to give you a reduced funding for, I'm just curious to see how that looks. Is it just going to be, yes, you're approved, or no, you're not, or we have this much money available? Just to Mayor Caniff's point about the reduction of potential sizes, because to Councillor Crew's point, right now we are in a planning exercise, and I think that if most of us were to see a unit with this many units going up, it's something that's supported by municipal and provincial policy. But I do think that personally the numbers are high, but this isn't for me to say now. So I'm just curious on how that would look when the funding is acknowledged, if it's accepted or not.
Through you, Mayor Caniff. There's multiple layers to that question, because there's multiple different funding streams, and each program has a different approach to yes, no, or negotiation. Under the Rapid Housing Strategy, Rapid Housing Initiative, that is a yes or no national competition. And so with we cooperated with the municipality to make an application through the municipality for the project stream for 71 units. So if the 71 unit application is accepted by CMHC, that would be a yes to the whole 71 units. the remaining 24 units doesn't have a secure funding stream yet. And so that would be an ongoing dialogue with staff, possibly with yourselves around, how do we support another application, whether it's to the province or to a different CMHC program or, some other strategy to try to round that out. But at this moment, there isn't a secure funding stream or even an applied for funding stream for the last 24 units proposed under this zoning.
So if this 71 comes to fruition, and we recognize that there's challenges there, or there's some things that need to be worked through, we are going to have the ability to potentially discuss those 24 units at a later time then? Is that how I'm understanding correctly? This did happen kind of quickly from the planning application, the funding application, so it's not something that I'm used to as a counselor going through a third-party entity when we're talking about these fundings. Dr. Redek has been very helpful to myself in answering a lot of questions, but I'm just curious to see, because I would be much more palatable at that. So I'm just curious to see if there is that actual time for us to have that conversation, because we need to support supportive housing, because I just read an article in the paper the other day, counselors quoting people living under the bridges, and obviously that's a very challenging issue as well. It's not an easy topic, but I'm just curious to see if that conversation, maybe Dr. Redek, you can also comment on that as well. If it stays at that level, we would go through this process again, or is because it's approved through planning, it's just a matter of funding?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Certainly Graham has done a very good job in terms of explaining the funding kind of mechanisms and process. If we are successful in that funding, we will have to bring that back to council for another discussion about how this project moves forward. So, I'm crossing my fingers that we receive $14 million in terms of federal funding, because we need supportive housing. But there will be another conversation that happens at this table where we will look at supporting Indwell and all the great work that they do. And I think if we were to try and do this in-house, if the municipality was trying to take on supportive housing, it would be much more costly for sure in terms of us doing that. We don't have the expertise, and we would have to bring staff on in terms of that providing supportive housing, let alone the actual build. So I think, as Graham's indicated, there are the additional units in terms of securing more funding. If there are funding streams, we would then again have to come to council in terms of asking for council to support us applying for further funding. So I think there are a lot of steps moving forward that council will still be able to have further discussion about this project. So
thank you, Dr. Redek. And just in closing, if this is supported, this will obviously alter what way I feel I'm going to go. So we do have the opportunity at another later date, as Mayor Caniff said, to discuss this further when it comes back to the funding aspects. And I don't need a detailed answer. I just need to know that we do have the ability to look at that, because to me it sounded like we didn't, but then it sounded like we did, and now it sounds like I'm not certain, and I just need to be kind of understand it a little bit more diligently.
thank you, Mayor Caniff. So I think council has supported the application. So they supported the funding in order for us to apply for the RHI funding. If we are successful in receiving that funding, we will come back to council, because council will have to accept that funding and go through the process of a contribution agreement that we will work through and bring forward to council for any further discussion that will happen. What that looks like will be determined if we find out if we have secured that funding or not. So we will be coming back with that. Does that help?
Yeah, it just goes back to the scope. Obviously, you just said it perfectly that the municipality can't do this for this cost. So I guess my question just goes, is it all or nothing for this funding? If the funding is approved, Is that the scope that's moving forward, or do we have the ability to discuss that at a later time? I know this isn't the time to do that. I respect the will of council, although I did not support it. This is now a planning meeting, and I respect the will of council. I'm just curious to see if this is an all or nothing based on the fact that if we are supported to the extent, I don't want to affect the application now, because I respect the will of council. So I'm just curious to see, is it all or nothing moving forward, I guess?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I think that Graham has answered that question, Councillor Sakachi. So the RHI funding is a yes or no answer. The RHI funding is not a, you asked for this, but we're only going to give you this. Does that help?
Everything, that does help. Thank you very much.
Councillor Jubenville?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to confirm, we know that we're waiting for federal funding, but I'm just wondering when we will find that out. When is the deadline that we're going to have that application?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. We are anticipating that by the end of June, we will be told whether or not we are successful with that funding. We've reached out multiple times and they are still sticking with that timeline, at least what they're saying to us. So, you know, that's kind of 6 weeks away only. It's not very long to wait much further in terms of that. Unless, and I will defer to Graham if they've heard anything differently, but that's what the federal government is sticking to right now in terms of timeline.
Thank you. I'm just curious, why are we, I just need to know why are we doing the zoning application ahead of time? Like, is that a normal procedure to do that? Knowing that we don't even, knowing that we don't have the funding yet and it potentially might not be a go, so why do we do the zoning application?
Through your Mayor Caniff, this is a very strategic decision by council and by staff to prepare for the shovel readiness for this application. The Rapid Housing Initiative particularly is predicated on being able to move quickly. And if zoning is not in place, it's actually automatically rejected as an application. So it's there's a chicken and eggness for sure of the requirement to be able to move, and part of being able to move forward is planning permission in place. I think that it is also in all of Indwell's experience, there's a asynchronous relationship between the planning permission and the zoning. And because we're dealing with levels of government usually beyond the municipal, provincial and federal, that have constantly changing priorities, having sites that are designed to meet local needs, designed physically to be responsive to the location, and appropriately have appropriate planning permission is very critical in being able to attract senior order government funding. And I think that if I can add to your question and respond to your question as well, Councillor, all of Indwell's projects are partnerships with municipalities. We can't go out on our own and just do anything really, because we're stewards of public resources. We're addressing municipal priorities in terms of waiting lists and dealing with the homelessness situation and supportive housing and long-term stabilities and seniors being able to age with disabilities. All of these things are municipally driven, community-led solutions, and that's why on all of our applications for funding, we have to come back through the municipality, whether it's through staff under council's delegation or direct through council. So for accepting RHI, as Dr. Reddick talked about, or whether it's for future applications, these are conversations which we will continue to have with you, you know, as the project, any specific parts of the project even continue to move forward.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to the motion. Councillor Crew and Councillor Beaver McGregor, can you move this, please?
I will move the planning application.
So seconded.
Councillor Crew, do you have any comments?
No, just briefly, just to remind council that we're only voting on these A and B and these planning application, on this planning application. I just want to say I appreciate Mr. French's, wherever he went, Mr. French's comments. that, these are people, these are tenants, they live in neighborhoods. It's a beautiful neighborhood, so, I'm not going to make a bunch of comments tonight, but maybe at the end, if there's more to say, I might, if I'm allowed that, Mr. Mayor, but we need this. We need supportive housing. I understand reducing the need, and reducing the units, but if you can figure out another way to reduce the need for homelessness and homeless people, I'm all in. But no one else has come up with any better solutions. So this is just part of a strategy, and I think that we, as a council, need to move forward because we will be cleaning the bridge again if we don't.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Crew. I did have a couple of questions of clarity. I know we've discussed a little bit about density, and I think it's important to understand that planning in Ontario has changed a great deal with respect to density, in the past 3 months, 6 months, 18 months. So on this type of property of this size, if someone were to want to divide it into lots for single lots, how many lots could they fit on a property like this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Provided an owner made the necessary applications to council and they were approved and was willing probably to build a short cul-de-sac off of Seminon and demolish the school, conservatively, let's say 24 lots.
Right, and then by right currently, on each of those lots, you could build a triplex based on Ontario, like a 3-unit dwelling, correct?
That's correct.
So you could have, without changing the density, 75 units. You could have 150 people. And that's, what provincial legislation would allow right now. And I think that's important to know when we're thinking about like what actually is low density or high density. This is not really high density at all. So I think that's, in my view, important to keep in mind when we're talking about this. And I think it's important, it was mentioned that the current zoning allows for things like a nursing home. Let me read the list here. Small rental dwelling unit, large rental dwelling unit, churches, clinics, those types of things. And we've fortunately seen a lot of schools repurposed into sort of various uses. And we're going to be facing that, I think, more in the future. And we do need more housing. And the deputations were right. We need more housing on the north side, on the south side, in Wallaceburg and Blenheim and Tilbury. And I hope we see those applications in the future. So right now, you could build a 3-story unit or a 3-story building on that location, and you could have it as a nursing home or small rentals. And when you think about that, and when we think about this application, then the only real difference is the people that live there, right? So the Ontario Human Rights Commission says that every person has a right to equal treatment with respect to the occupancy of accommodation without discrimination because of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, age, marital status, family status, disability, or their seat of public assistance. And that's from the Ontario Human Rights Code. So I think it's important to know when we're voting on this, we are really just voting on the type of people that can live there. And realistically, we're not permitted to do that.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Don't laugh at me. I'll try and keep this to a planning thing, because that's what we're here to do. And for what Councilor McGregor just said, sure, we're not here voting on what type of people, but we are here to vote on what type of buildings going in. That's what planning does. And, this is Dolson 2.0. We were here 8 years ago or something. But this structure, this institution, is a terrible fit for this neighborhood. We don't have to put things in because it's a feel-good thing to do. And, people have certain rights to do certain things. Well, I'd like to live in Forest Hill in Toronto, but I don't have that right. That's a privilege because I don't make that much money. So, am I discriminated against because I can't live in Forest Hill? No, that's the world we live in. And I've been to this neighborhood a million times. One of my kids went to that school. I've attended the church across the street 1,000 times. And it's a quiet, sleepy little neighborhood with single bungalow dwellings. And we're gonna approve maybe a gigantic apartment building that is an institution. Like this, from a planning perspective, I just don't see that this is a good idea. I think it's a terrible idea. And from, thank you.
If I can remind the gallery, at the beginning, I did some rules of participation, and I just want to remind that we have to keep decorum in the gallery, please. Thank you.
Okay, so anyway, just in summary, one thing I don't understand that maybe Edward could help me out with is there's currently this tiny little school which had obviously a girls and boys bathroom and maybe a shower and some staff rooms. If we build this, nearly 100 units, each with a kitchen, shower, sink, toilet, plus there's like communal cooking, how is the infrastructure possibly, like on page 5 of the report, there is one sentence that says the existing water and sanitary sewage services to the site can accommodate the planned intensification and redevelopment. Now, how's that possible? Like, did we have the foresight 60 years ago to build gigantic sewers there, thinking maybe one day? Like, anybody got an answer for that one? Because my point here is, you know, in a couple of years, are we going to have an infrastructure cost of tens of millions of dollars because of what I just said? How can the infrastructure there handle this without knowing it's coming? Yeah. Well, I wouldn't think so. That's why I'm asking.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So municipal engineers have done a review of the system and did not identify any concerns. The applicant, if this is approved and moves forward with the development, will be required to submit an application for site plan approval. It's through the site plan approval process that the applicant would be required to prepare a detailed servicing study to validate the assumptions that have been made so far, but nothing was revealed in a preliminary review that is cause for any concern with regard to sanitary or water services.
So we overbuild our infrastructure that much that we should really look at whatever we're going to do in the future with infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I stated was that the municipal engineers prepared a high-level cursory review and that no immediate concerns were identified that would cause further investigation at this time, and that the applicant would be required to prepare a detailed servicing study at the site plan application stage.
And that's prior to the building permit being issued?
That's correct.
And if that comes back negatively, then what? Which I assume it will, because there's, you know, you're injecting like a massive infrastructure into this thing. Yeah. Anyway, you know what, Ryan, don't worry, but we can get to that if that comes back. But anyway, the bottom line for me is I think this is, it's a bad fit for the neighborhood. The property values are clearly going to plummet. And the idea that, you know, cedar trees are going to provide privacy when you're in a bungalow in your backyard and there's a 3-story building looking down and somebody's going to plant cedars, like that seems laughable to me, really. Like cedars, honestly. Again, strictly from a planning point of view, I think it's a terrible fit. I don't know what is a good place. That's not my job to find. But I know this isn't it. Like the neighborhood's not going to be the same. Like, and when we talk about a nursing home or a library or the sleepy little school that they had there, we all know that this place is not going to resemble a nursing home or that sleepy little school. Like, it's not. And we don't have to get into all the social things about what it is, but it doesn't matter who lives there. You plop in all these people in that little area, in that sleepy little neighborhood, it's going to completely change the neighborhood for the negative. And I won't support it, and I hope that we don't. And I'll just leave it there.
Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor Kenneth. I believe this is the question for Ryan. So I guess the reason I'm asking this is kind of what I said before. Had the questions been answered differently, and I guess more honestly to me, that they would be working with council, I would have been a no on that vote. We wouldn't even be here today. So could we amend this bylaw and add a C and have that C say to a maximum of 65 units for this property?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so the unit count is something in zoning that is referred to as the density on the property, and it is within council's purview to set density through zoning. So if council wished to add a C to include a maximum density for supportive housing at a certain number, it could consider that, yes.
Okay. Is that on mine or different? I'd like to listen to Lauren first before.
Okay, if you want to pass, because you only get once to talk about this, so.
Okay, I'm gonna, that's splitting the difference between where it started and where it is now. So unless somebody wants to go lower than this, I will say, can we amend this bylaw, this zoning bylaw, and add a C? And the C says that the maximum number of units on this property is 65. And can, I'm not sure.
Okay, so just to catch council up on the conversation, so the first conversation was, is this a reconsideration? Because we already had the 95 units voted on, but that is strictly for the funding, not for zoning, so it is not a reconsideration. However, Polly Smith has advised that if we go with 65, we will not get funding. The funding minimum is 71 units.
So would you consider revising to 71?
Yes. But that's total, so then that's total for the property, and we now have a vacant school, correct? It's a 70, is it 71?
Let's get a seconder, then we'll talk about that. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Finn? Okay, we need to get some thought on that one. Ryan, do you have any thoughts on, or does anybody have any thoughts on this or comments from administration?
Thank you. So I think 65 would have been a problem because you had previously given us direction to make an application. So our application already had 71 as a minimum. So at least if this is passed, then I don't think we're required to amend our application because it's consistent with what has already been submitted. So I don't know if April wants to add anything to that.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. The 71 units, you are correct, will not impact our RHI application. I think what we have to be aware of are all those additional things that Graham spoke about in terms of the retrofitting of that existing school property, keeping the gymnasium, keeping all of those other things as part of community access to the possibility of some really great spaces. So that piece we'd have to have Graham comment on as to what would Indwell do with the remaining kind of space. So certainly to answer the question, we need it at 71 units or it impacts the RHI. But the remaining amount, we would be coming back to council if there really was funding available that we would apply for. And Graham can speak about what they would do with the existing space. And I think I'll stop there because I think Graham will be able to speak to that existing space.
Through you, Mayor Caniff. 71 units, I'll concur, is the minimum in order to retain the validity of the RHI application. So I would definitely keep the amended motion. In terms of reusing the school, we would work as diligently as possible with RHI to make sure that we can use the 71 unit funding to include the existing school and build in addition to that, so that we don't have a vacant building sitting there waiting for some other future use, if that's the best approach. I don't have the program guidelines in front of me to know the fine print on that, but we would work as hard as possible to make sure that the best possible project, utilizing the existing school as a priority, would be our priority.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I think that this question kind of comes from, many councillors asking several questions about if the number of units was a negotiable number, and it's now gotten to a point where we are saying, there's a motion up to say that we're stopping at 71 units in order to maybe feel like there's a little bit of control that council has here over how many units are put in, because there has been several that have expressed that they're concerned with the number of units that are going in. I think that also when you talk about like the different use, if we don't go with the full maximum, I thought that we got those key areas and different uses because of the zoning it as institutional, not because of the number of units we were putting in. Can you just clarify?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Anderson, what I'm speaking of is Indwell owns this building. Indwell owns this property. So the 71 units in terms of building, that's really up to Graham as to how they then navigate those 71 units on that space. So so I'm not talking about the zoning piece, I'm talking about the existing building that has an auditorium and a gym, and they might choose to navigate that space differently if there's only 71 units. Does that help? So I'm not talking about the zoning at all.
Thank you. Yes, it does. And I guess my question, is maybe for Graham. With this application for the funding, it is for 71 new built units. Is that why you're saying you have to find out whether you can then use the school as a addition, like as putting some of the 71 units in there rather than that be an additional 24? Is that what you're saying?
Through your mechanic, that was our intention in the application. We believe that there might be latitude within the RHI program to flex where those 71 units get built, whether within a converted structure or within a new structure, but we will have to meet the intent around accessibility, affordability, and environmental sustainability as a part of the overall project. We can't compromise on those issues, and so there'll be, if we are allowed to use the school building, it will require us to make sure we still meet all of the outcomes of the 72 units that are being funded, 71 units that are being funded.
Thank you. And I guess my concern with that is if it would change how you were going to do your construction of that site, my worry at this point now is that I predict this is going to be something that's very, very, very successful and is going to be very, very useful for the community of Chatham-Kent. My concern would be that then we limit ourselves with 71 units, you cater your building to that, and then we're like, wait, we could really use an additional 20 units, and you're like, yeah, well, now that's not possible because we've used the school. We no longer have the ability to put that on there. So I just want to make sure that we're making the best choices here as for what we actually are trying to accomplish here. And what we're actually trying to accomplish here is to encourage those that need additional supports to get on their own feet, that we are giving them their best chance. And through supportive housing is how we do that. So the more people that we can help, the better off we are. Potentially, the less we may need, right? Hopefully we do get to a point where we no longer need 95 units. But at this point we do, and we need a lot more than that. So my fear with going to the 71 is that we then backpedal and say, wait, like this is working really, really great. And all of these worries and concerns and fears, are no longer worries and concerns and fears. It's actually a really wonderful thing and successful thing that has happened for Chatham-Kent. So I think that we need to really, really think about what our long-term goals are here for supportive housing specifically, but then also for how we want to try and encourage those to really make the best out of their lives and accomplish their full potential.
Councillor Finn?
Thank you, Worship, through you to Graham. This project at St. Agnes isn't your only project that you are looking at doing in the immediate near future, is it? If I read correctly in the last report, there were a couple other areas you were looking at?
Through you, Mayor Kenneth, yes, that's correct. I mean, we are working closely with staff to identify opportunities to solve the problems of this community when it comes to homelessness. We read the paper as does everyone else, and we know that solutions don't invent themselves. We know that one site is not the perfect solution to all problems. We know that. We will commit to putting our best foot forward with whatever number you approve tonight, and be successful in continuing to work with the community to find other sites. The homelessness isn't static. The opioid crisis isn't static. What's driving people into homelessness isn't static. And so as we look at sites, as we explore together what opportunities exist to solve the problems, supportive housing is the only sustainable solution to homelessness. So how do we create as many supportive housing units as needed? It won't be all on St. Agnes, and we'll continue to work with you in Chatham, as well as other municipalities throughout Chatham-Kent, to find the solutions that are needed and to create them as quickly as possible.
Thank you, and as I said, I am not against supportive housing, it is needed. But I also look at the community around it. For a project to be successful, for not only the community and the residents in the supportive housing, you need to work together. So this one, you may lose 25 units, but you may gain in other areas. Am I correct?
I don't want to negotiate against myself, but we will continue to pursue what's needed across the county, or across the municipality, in addition to St. Agnes.
But it could be made up by adding 5 or 10 in another area, if successful.
I would reframe that and say, through you, Mr. Mayor, to be successful, we have to work together, and that includes the funding model. We don't have a funding model in place for the remaining 24 units. So to be successful, to fund another 24 or another 54 or another 14 in some other location will take ongoing and continued cooperation with staff and with yourselves.
Councillor Pinsonal, then Councillor Wright.
Okay, I haven't spoken. I wasn't going to speak on this one, but I'm a little bit confused now. So even if we drop to 71 units, are you not still building the same building 3 stories high for the same? The only difference is the other 24 were going to be added into the existing school. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that that's part of the open question. How do we fit 71 units into the site in order to meet the RHI requirement and still utilize the facilities that are there? The existing school is infrastructure. We keep the heat on. We keep the keep the lights on. We don't want to have it sitting there empty while maybe for who knows what future. If we can use 71 units, build 71 units, incorporating the existing school and putting a new addition, that would be our new intention based on this conversation. We don't want to have the school sitting there empty while we build 71 new units beside. I think that would also allow us to rethink maybe some of those heights, some of the layout, so that if it's 71 units, we wouldn't have to put the exact L shape that we have there if we're using the school building. Now, part of that is obviously we have to redesign the program model, make sure the spaces, figure all of that out. But that's all well within our scope of capabilities, and sort of like our everyday work is figuring out those technical details.
So more specific, will it be 3 stories high, or can you lower that if we go to the 71? I think that's the problem with the neighbor.
I've heard all of the concerns from the neighbors, and we will work hard to address all of those concerns that we can with the design of the facility.
Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Already asked, thank you.
All right, seeing no other questions, we're going to vote on item C. And that will be concluded in the motion or not based on this vote.
Counselor Carmen McGregor's not here. 14. All votes are in. Motion fails 6-8.
Okay, with that, we'll go to the existing motion on the floor. Any other questions related to that? Councillor Crew, if you want to make final comments based on you were the one that initiated.
Thank you. I just ask council to vote on the planning issues at hand. Any other issues that come with funding or anything like that, we can address those with site plans and sewer questions and things like that, which are all very good questions when you're building in a neighborhood, and that's the time to address those. These are the two things that we're voting on, and I just ask council to just continue to work with our community partners to help us address this problem in our community. That's all I have to say. Thank you, and I hope that you have the foresight to see the way to helping fix this problem.
With that, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 13-2.
We'll move on to notices of motion. We have three, Councillor Jubenville, Councillor Anderson, and Councillor Doyle. So, Councillor Jubenville.
Thank you, Mayor. I, Councillor Rhonda Jubenville, provide notice that I will be bringing the following motion for voting and discussion at the May 29 meeting of Council. Whereas the Ontario Ministry of Health recently conducted the all-hazard investigation of water wells in North Kent, where water well sediment collection and analysis was the principal motivating factor for the investigation, and whereas the all-hazard investigation instead analyzed only water, not sediment, from the participating wells, and whereas the results from a more recent analytical testing of sediment from 9 private wells in North Kent that was funded by private donations showed concentrations similar to concentrations known to exist in the metals-rich Kettle Point Black Shale, which are potentially toxic and dangerous heavy metals, and whereas the need to complete the full analytical testing, including the testing of sediment in the water wells in North Kent, has become ever more evident. Therefore, be it resolved that the municipality of Chatham-Kent formally request and strongly encourage the Ontario Ministry of Health to proceed with completion of specific health hazard testing that remains incomplete following the all-hazard investigation, as stated in the report by the expert panel that advised the investigation. Further, to ask the Ontario Ministry of Health to proceed with sampling and analytical testing of private water wells and complete studies of bioavailability of potential toxic substances associated with the sediment in all water wells in North Kent in the footprint area of the North Kent 1 wind farm, the East Lake St. Clair wind farm, and the Boralex wind farm. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson, then Councillor Doyle.
I, Councillor Lauren Anderson, state that I will be bringing forward the following motion for discussion on May 29th. Whereas Council approved on January 16th, 2023, the technical recommendations, the Talbot Trail Relocation Environmental Assessment for a long-range property protection plan for a road and utility corridor from Second Concession to Crawford Road, and whereas the recommended plan reflects a factor of safety beyond the future top of bluff infrastructure protection design criteria of a 100-year hazard zone with the considerate of climate change, and whereas there are concerns related to the timing and cost of implementing the long-range property protection plan and realignment of the existing Talbot Trail, that administration be requested to develop an interim solution that meets an infrastructure protection design criteria for a 30 to 100-year hazard zone through an environmental assessment addendum to be approved plan between Coatsworth Road and Stevenson Road, and that the existing contract with BT Engineering be extended in the amount of $58,760, including HST, for the environmental assessment addendum, and to be funded from the capital reserve.
Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I, Councillor Ryan Doyle, provide notice that I will be bringing the following motion for voting and discussion at the May 29th meeting of council. Whereas the private business Aqua City has approached the municipality of Chatham-Kent and would like to enter into a contract related to inflatable water park kiosk tent, storage container, parking, and profit sharing. And whereas Aqua City has expressed that they would like their profit sharing contributions to go towards project near the beach in Erie O, including but not limited to upgrading the parking in Erie O near the beach, upgrading the bathrooms near the beach, and improving the accessible access to the beach. And whereas Aqua City would require a storage container to store their equipment outside of operating hours, either near their portable storage tent on the beach or on municipal property near the baseball diamond in Erie O. And whereas Aqua City would like to only use a portable tent on Erie O Beach as their kiosk during their operating hours. Now therefore, council authorized the general manager, infrastructure and engineering services to negotiate and approve a lease and profit sharing agreement with Aqua City regarding use of portions of CK land for a kiosk tent and storage container, non-exclusive parking rights, and profit sharing, subject to terms of the lease and profit sharing agreement being satisfactory to the Chief Financial Officer and Director, Legal Services, and administration determine a preferable location for Aqua City to put their storage container on municipal property based on other uses of the beach area, and work with Aqua City with regards to the location of the portable tent, and administration ensure that all provincial and or federal requirements are met by Aqua City with regards to the placement of their water park in the water before the business is allowed to operate to the public, and administration be directed to review the potential for establishing additional parking in the area of Erie O Beach, and administration establish a dedicated account for profit sharing received from this project, so those funds can be used towards projects near the Erie O Beach.
Okay, we'll go non-agenda business. Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor, I would like to just announce to everybody that the new Glasstown Brewery will be opening up over the long weekend, and before we're back, I believe we have a ribbon cutting on Wednesday, and there is a community business after hours or Connect After 5 on Thursday. I'm not sure what's in there on Friday, but the grand opening is on Saturday, and it's my understanding that they have reserved their the original first keg of beer, which will be loaded onto Mr. Shepley, one of the owners, onto his antique truck, and it will be piped down by Legionnaires to the Legion, as they will be carrying the beer there for also celebration there. But if you get out over the long weekend, please come to Wallaceburg. This brewery is absolutely fantastic. It is second to none in the design, in the interior, and what they've put in there. So if you like breweries, and even if you don't, it's my understanding they are carrying other libations, and there's food and other things going on, but it'll be a wonderful outdoor patio. Pull up your boat or drive to town. We'd love to have you over the long weekend in Wallaceburg.
Councillor Story.
We could make a motion to have our next council meeting there? No, sorry. I got distracted. Thank you. I just wanted to give a big shout out to Bridget Carlton, who played in the first ever WNBA game on Canadian soil this past weekend, and Bridget was the only Canadian player at that game, and it was an awesome experience to see her on the big screen and throwing out the first pitch at the Jays game, so huge congratulations to her, and I hope we see more of that soon. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the first and second reading. Councillor Pinsino and Councillor Bondi. Can I get you?
So moved, your worship.
And seconded.
Anybody opposed? Motion carried. The third and final reading. Councillor Thompson and Councillor Hall.
Oh, there we go. Happy to move it.
So seconded.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried. The resolution of council in closed session and adjournment. Councillor Crew and then Councillor Story. Can I get you to wrap it up for us?
I move that Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Monday, May 29th, 2023, and that Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act. I so move.
Happy to second.
Anyone opposed to wrapping up at 8:38? If you want to stay after, go ahead, but I think everyone else will. Thanks, everyone.